There's a feeling you've been carrying. Maybe for weeks, maybe for months. It's hard to describe, hard to pin down, but it's there. Constant, persistent, unsettling. Everything feels slightly off. Not catastrophically wrong. You can't point to one specific thing that's broken. But there's this underlying wrongness. Like you're watching your life through glass. Like you're 1 degree separated from your own experience. Like reality has gone slightly out of focus and you can't quite bring it back into clarity. You wake up in the same bed. You go through the same routines. You interact with the same people. But something is different. Something has shifted. And the most frustrating part is that you can't explain it. When people ask if you're okay, you say yes, because technically, nothing is wrong. Your life hasn't fallen apart. No crisis has occurred. But internally, you feel like you're walking through a world that doesn't quite fit anymore. Like you've outgrown your own reality and you're stuck wearing it anyway. Maybe you've noticed that conversations feel hollow. People are saying the same things they always say, but the words don't land the way they used to. The topics that used to engage you now feel trivial, surface level, exhausting. You're going through the motions of connection, but feeling more isolated than ever. And when you try to bring depth, when you try to talk about what you're actually thinking or feeling or questioning, you're met with blank stares or quick subject changes. So you've learned to stay quiet, to keep the wrongness to yourself. Or maybe it's your environment, the place you live, the job you have, the routines you follow. None of it feels right anymore. Not in a way where you can say, I hate my job, or I need to move. It's subtler than that. It's like these things were built for a previous version of you and that version doesn't exist anymore, but you're still trying to operate within structures designed for someone you've outgrown. And the mismatch creates this constant low-level discomfort that you can't resolve because you can't even fully articulate what's wrong. Time feels strange too. Days blur together. Weeks pass, and you can't remember what you did. But simultaneously, time feels stretched, like you're moving through molasses. Like each day takes forever but accomplishes nothing. You're caught in this paradox where time is simultaneously too fast and too slow, and neither version feels natural. Clock time says one thing. Your internal sense of time says something completely different. And the disconnect is disorienting. And then there are the moments where reality feels paper thin, where you look at your life, your relationships, your possessions, your identity, and it all feels temporary, fragile, like it could dissolve at any moment. Not in a depressive, nothing matters way, in a detached observer way, like you're watching someone else's life and you just happen to be playing the main character. There's no emotional charge to it, just this strange awareness that none of this is as solid as it pretends to be. You might have tried to fix it, changed your routine, started new habits, ended relationships that felt stale, pursued new interests, but nothing resolves the feeling. The wrongness persists regardless of what you change externally, because the wrongness isn't external. It's not about your circumstances. It's about something deeper, something happening at the level of reality itself. And no amount of rearranging your life is going to fix it, because your life isn't the problem. Here's what nobody tells you about this feeling. It's not depression. It's not anxiety. It's not a mental health crisis. It's not evidence that something is wrong with you. This feeling, this specific sensation of reality being slightly off, of not fitting into your own life anymore, of time being weird and connections feeling hollow and everything seeming temporary, this is a very specific state, and it has a very specific cause. You're between timelines. You're in transition. You've left one configuration of reality, but you haven't fully locked into the new one yet. And that in-between state, that liminal space, that's what creates the feeling you can't name. You're not losing your grip on reality. Reality is losing its grip on you. And that feeling of wrongness, that's not a problem. That's a signal. A confirmation that something profound is happening beneath the surface of your everyday experience. You're shifting. And this feeling is how it feels to be mid-shift. Uncomfortable, disorienting, but not wrong. Actually, perfectly right. Because you can't stay in a timeline you've outgrown, and you can't arrive in a new one without passing through the space between. That's where you are. Between, And once you understand that, the feeling stops being terrifying and starts being information. Let me explain what it actually means to be between timelines. Because this isn't metaphor. This isn't spiritual poetry. This is a describable state with identifiable characteristics. And understanding the mechanics of what's happening makes the experience significantly less destabilizing. You exist at a specific frequency. That frequency is determined by your dominant thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and level of consciousness. And that frequency determines which timeline, which configuration of reality you experience. Think of timelines as radio stations. Each station broadcasts at a specific frequency, and your consciousness is the receiver. You can only tune into stations that match your frequency, change your frequency, and you change which station you're receiving. Most of the time, your frequency is stable, consistent. You wake up at roughly the same vibration you went to sleep at. Your thoughts follow familiar patterns. Your emotions cycle through predictable ranges. Your beliefs remain relatively fixed. And because your frequency is stable, the timeline you're experiencing is stable. Reality feels solid, continuous, predictable. You're locked into one station, and it plays clearly without static or interference. But sometimes, something happens that disrupts that stability. You have a profound realization that changes a core belief. You experience something that shifts your emotional baseline. You make a decision that fundamentally alters your trajectory. You do deep inner work that dissolves old patterns and creates new neural pathways. And when any of these things occur, your frequency begins to change. Not instantly, gradually, but undeniably. And as your frequency changes, you start to detune from your current timeline. The station you've been receiving starts to get fuzzy. Static creeps in. The signal weakens. Because you're no longer a perfect frequency match for that configuration of reality. Your consciousness is shifting away from it. And that detuning is what creates the feeling of wrongness. Reality doesn't feel solid anymore because you're no longer fully locked into it. You're starting to phase out. But here's the critical part. You haven't fully tuned into the new timeline yet either. Your frequency is changing, yes. You're moving toward a new station. But you haven't stabilized at the new frequency. You're in flux, in transition. And during that transition, you're not clearly receiving either station. You're between frequencies, between configurations, between timelines. And that between space is inherently unstable. This is why everything feels wrong. You're experiencing reality through a lens that's no longer calibrated for where you are. The old timeline doesn't fit because you've outgrown its frequency. But the new timeline isn't accessible yet because you haven't fully arrived at its frequency. So you're caught in this liminal space where nothing feels quite right because you're literally not fully present in any single configuration of reality. You're split, oscillating. One foot in the world you're leaving, one foot reaching toward the world you're moving into, and no stable ground beneath you. And time feels weird because time isn't actually linear. That's a perceptual construct your brain creates to make sense of experience. But when you're between timelines, when you're not fully locked into one configuration, that construct breaks down. Your consciousness is touching multiple probable futures simultaneously. Some moments you're receiving signal from the timeline you're leaving. Time feels familiar, stable, but wrong. Other moments you're receiving signal from the timeline you're approaching. Time feels accelerated, dreamlike, full of potential, but not yet real. And your brain can't reconcile these conflicting inputs, so time stops making sense. The hollowness in conversations happens because you're no longer frequency matched with the people around you. They're still operating at the old frequency, still locked into the old timeline. And you're in transition. So when you interact, there's dissonance, miscommunication, a sense that you're speaking different languages even though you're using the same words. Because you are speaking different languages. You're speaking from a frequency they're no longer at. And they're speaking from a frequency you're no longer at. The gap is real. And no amount of effort can bridge it until either they shift to match you, or you complete your shift and find people who match your new frequency. The detachment you feel, the sense that your life is temporary, that nothing is solid, that's actually accurate perception. From the perspective of the timeline you're leaving, your life there is ending. It's dissolving. becoming less real as you detune from it. And from the perspective of the timeline you're approaching, your life there hasn't solidified yet. It's still potential. Probable but not definite. So you're caught between a reality that's fading and a reality that hasn't formed. And both feel equally unreal because neither is fully real to you in this moment. You're between timelines. Not stuck. Not lost. Just in transition. And transition is inherently uncomfortable because it requires you to release what was without yet having what will be. You're in the void. The gap. The quantum space between collapsed realities. And staying here too long feels unbearable because human consciousness craves stability, definition, solid ground. But you can't go back to the old timeline. Your frequency has already changed too much. And you can't force yourself into the new timeline prematurely. It requires you to fully stabilize at the new frequency first. So, you're here. Between. And the feeling of wrongness is actually your consciousness accurately perceiving that you're in a state of flux. Nothing is supposed to feel stable right now. You're not supposed to feel grounded. You're mid-shift. And the only way through is forward. Stabilizing at the new frequency. Allowing the old timeline to fully fade. Allowing the new timeline to fully form. And trusting that this in-between state, as uncomfortable as it is temporary. You're not broken. You're transitioning. And once you stabilize, reality will feel solid again. Just different. Better. Aligned with who you're becoming instead of who you were. There are 7 specific signs that confirm you're in this between state. Not vague feelings. Concrete, identifiable experiences that only happen when you're transitioning between timeline configurations. And recognizing these signs is important because it transforms confusion into clarity. You stop wondering what's wrong and start understanding what's happening. Sign 1. Reality feels dreamlike. Not like you're literally dreaming, but like there's a quality of unreality to everyday experience. Conversations happen, but they feel scripted. Places look familiar, but slightly off. You go through your day and it feels like you're watching yourself from a distance. This happens because you're not fully collapsed into this timeline anymore. Your consciousness is loosely tethered instead of firmly anchored. And that loose tethering creates the dreamlike dissociation. You're here, but you're also partially somewhere else. And your perception reflects that split. Sign 2. Synchronicities explode. You see repeating numbers constantly. You think of someone and they text immediately. You need information and it appears from unexpected sources. Random conversations contain exactly what you needed to hear. These aren't coincidences. Synchronicities spike during timeline transitions because you're oscillating between configurations. You're touching multiple probable realities simultaneously. And when those realities overlap, when your consciousness briefly aligns with different versions of now, information and experiences from those versions bleed through. The synchronicities are overlap. Proof that you're not locked into one solid timeline, but moving fluidly between several. Sign 3. Sleep becomes strange. You're either sleeping way more than normal, or barely sleeping at all. Dreams become intensely vivid, often featuring alternate versions of your life or places you've never been but somehow know. You wake up exhausted even after full nights of sleep, or you wake up energized after 4 hours. This happens because during timeline transitions, your consciousness does heavy work while you sleep. It's processing the shift, integrating the new frequency, releasing attachment to the old configuration. And that work is energetically expensive. Your sleep patterns destabilize because your consciousness is doing something more demanding than normal dream processing. Sign 4. People fall away rapidly. Relationships that were stable suddenly end. Friends stop calling. Connections that felt important become effortless to release. And it's not dramatic. There's no big fight. People just drift. And you let them. Because you can feel that they belong to the frequency you're leaving. They're not coming with you to the new timeline. And trying to maintain connection feels forced, exhausting, inauthentic. So you stop trying. And the ease with which they fall away confirms that the separation is natural, aligned, part of the transition. Sign 5. Old coping mechanisms stop working. The things you used to do to feel better don't work anymore. The distractions that used to numb you feel hollow. The habits that used to ground you feel meaningless. Even positive practices, meditation, exercise, creative work, might suddenly feel forced or ineffective. This isn't failure. This is evidence that you're operating at a new frequency where the old tools don't apply. What worked at the old frequency doesn't translate to the transition space. You need new practices, new approaches. But you can't access them yet because you haven't fully stabilized at the new frequency where they'll naturally emerge. Sign 6. You can't make decisions. Simple choices feel impossible. What to eat, what to wear, whether to accept an invitation. Everything feels equally meaningless or equally important, and you can't differentiate. This paralysis happens because you're between identities. The old you would have had clear preferences. The new you will have clear preferences, but right now, you're neither. You're in the space between selves, and decision-making requires a stable sense of self to orient from. Without that stability, choice becomes overwhelming because you don't know who you're choosing for. Sign 7. You feel simultaneously exhausted and restless. Your body is bone-tired, but your mind won't settle. You're too drained to do anything but too activated to rest. You're stuck in this paradoxical state of depletion and agitation. This happens because transition requires enormous energy. Your entire energetic system is recalibrating. Old frequencies are being released. New frequencies are being integrated. And that process is taxing at every level: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. The exhaustion is real, but so is the restlessness. Because part of you knows you can't stay where you are. You have to keep moving forward even though you desperately need to rest. If you're experiencing 4 or more of these signs simultaneously, you're not going through a rough patch. You're not having a mental health crisis. You're between timelines, in active transition. And understanding that changes how you navigate it. You stop trying to fix what feels broken and start allowing the process to complete. You stop resisting the strangeness and start recognizing it as temporary. You're not stuck here. You're passing through. And these signs are confirmation that the passage is happening. Here's what makes this state so difficult. You can't force it to complete faster. You can't skip the between space and jump straight to the new timeline. And trying to rush the process only extends it. Because timeline transition isn't about effort. It's about frequency stabilization. And frequency can't be forced. It has to settle organically. Think about tuning a radio. When you're between stations, you hear static, fragments of both frequencies overlapping, neither one clear. And you can't force the dial to lock onto the new station by turning it faster or harder. You have to find the exact frequency and allow the receiver to stabilize there. If you keep frantically adjusting, you never lock in. You just create more static, more instability. Timeline transition works the same way. You're trying to stabilize at a new frequency. And stabilization requires stillness, patience, allowing, not force. But everything in you wants to force it. Because the between state is uncomfortable. Reality feels wrong. Nothing is working. You're exhausted and restless and disconnected. And the natural human response to discomfort is to do something. Fix it, control it, make it stop. So you try. You change your routine. You start new practices. You cut people off. You make dramatic life changes, hoping it will accelerate the shift. And sometimes those actions are aligned. Sometimes they're part of the natural unfolding. But often they're just you thrashing, trying to force resolution because you can't tolerate the uncertainty of not knowing when this will end. And here's what happens when you force. You create resistance. Because forcing comes from fear, from desperation, from the old frequency trying to regain control. And that energy, fear, desperation, control, is low frequency. It pulls you back toward the timeline you're trying to leave. So instead of stabilizing at the new frequency, you oscillate more violently between the old and the new. The transition extends. The discomfort intensifies. You stay stuck in the between space longer because you're working against the natural process instead of allowing it. The new timeline isn't something you create through action. It's something you allow through alignment. And alignment happens when you stop resisting what is. When you stop fighting the wrongness and start accepting that this is what transition feels like. When you stop trying to make the old timeline work and allow it to fully dissolve. When you stop grasping for the new timeline and trust that it will solidify when your frequency stabilizes. This doesn't mean you do nothing. It means you discern between aligned action and forced action. Aligned action feels spacious, even if it's challenging. It emerges naturally from inner knowing rather than external pressure. It might be scary, but it doesn't feel violent. Forced action feels contracted, desperate, like you're trying to outrun discomfort. It comes from the mind trying to control rather than the body and intuition guiding. And the difference between the two is palpable if you're paying attention. During timeline transition, your job isn't to make things happen. Your job is to allow what's already happening, to feel the discomfort without trying to escape it, to sit in the uncertainty without demanding answers, to release what's falling away without clinging, to stay present with the wrongness without making it mean something is wrong with you. Because nothing is wrong with you, you're just in a state that's inherently unstable. And trying to create stability through external manipulation won't work. Stability comes from internal frequency alignment, and that alignment can't be forced. So what do you actually do while you're between timelines? You maintain practices that support nervous system regulation. You rest more than feels productive. You say no to things that drain you even if they seem important. You stop performing. Stop pretending everything is fine. Stop trying to maintain connections that feel dead. You get radically honest about what actually feels true right now versus what you think should feel true. And you trust that this state is temporary. Because it is temporary, timeline transitions complete. Frequency stabilizes. The static clears and the new station locks in. Reality becomes solid again. Time starts making sense. Connections feel real. Your energy returns. But you can't control when that happens. You can only control whether you fight the process or allow it. And fighting extends it. Allowing completes it. So the faster you accept that you're between timelines, that this is what it feels like, that you can't force your way through, the faster you actually move through. Not because acceptance speeds it up mechanically, but because acceptance stops creating the resistance that was slowing it down. You're between timelines. And you can't leave until you stop trying to leave. You have to be here, fully, uncomfortably, honestly. And when you finally surrender to being here, when you stop fighting the wrongness and start trusting the process, that's when the frequency stabilizes. That's when the new timeline locks in. That's when everything that feels wrong right now starts feeling right again. But different, new, aligned with who you're becoming instead of who you were. So if you can't force it and you can't skip it, how do you actually navigate this space without losing your mind? Because existing between timelines is disorienting enough. You need practical tools for staying grounded when nothing feels solid. You need strategies for maintaining sanity when reality itself feels unstable. Here's what actually helps when you're in the between. First, stop trying to make sense of everything. Your logical mind is going to try desperately to understand what's happening, to categorize it, to fit it into a framework that makes it feel manageable. And that effort will exhaust you because you're trying to use linear thinking to understand a non-linear process. You're between timelines. That's inherently paradoxical. It doesn't make logical sense. And demanding that it makes sense keeps you stuck in mental loops that go nowhere. Instead, practice saying, I don't know what's happening and that's okay. Let it be mysterious. Let it be strange. Let yourself not understand. That surrender actually creates space for the transition to unfold. Second, trust your body over your mind. Your mind is going to catastrophize. It's going to interpret the wrongness as danger. It's going to create stories about what's broken and what needs fixing. But your body knows this is transition, not crisis. So when your mind is spiraling, drop into your body. Ask, am I safe right now, in this moment? Not safe in general, not safe in the future, but safe right now. And if the answer is yes, you're not in physical danger, you have shelter and food and basic needs met. Then you can trust that the mental panic is just the mind trying to make sense of something it can't categorize. The wrongness isn't danger, it's just unfamiliarity. and your body can hold that without panic if you let it lead instead of your thoughts. Third, reduce decision-making to the absolute minimum. You're already energetically depleted from the transition. Don't waste what little energy you have on unnecessary choices. Simplify everything. Wear the same clothes, eat the same meals, follow the same basic routine. This isn't about control. This is about conserving resources. Every decision requires energy. And right now your energy needs to go toward frequency stabilization, not meal planning. Give yourself permission to be boring, to be repetitive, to operate on autopilot for non-essential things. Save your decision-making capacity for the choices that actually matter. Fourth, honor the falling away. When people drift, let them go. When opportunities close, don't force them open. When old interests lose their appeal, don't guilt yourself into maintaining them. The falling away is part of the process. You're shedding the frequency signatures of the old timeline, and holding on to things that belong to that frequency keeps you tethered to it. You can't fully transition while you're still clinging to what you're supposed to be leaving. So practice release, not dramatic burning bridges release, just gentle, honest release. This doesn't fit anymore, and that's okay. I'm letting it go. Fifth, find anchors that transcend timelines. Most of your life right now feels unstable because it's frequency specific. It belongs to one configuration or another. But there are practices and experiences that exist beyond timeline specificity. Nature is one. Your body is one. Breath is one. Simple presence is one. These anchors ground you not in a specific reality but in existence itself. So when everything feels wrong, when you can't trust your thoughts or your relationships or your circumstances, come back to what's always true. You're breathing. You're alive. You're aware. That's real regardless of which timeline you're in. And reconnecting with that basic realness creates stability that doesn't depend on external circumstances. Sixth, accept that you're going to be misunderstood. The people still locked into the old timeline can't comprehend what you're experiencing. They're going to think you're depressed or lost or going through a phase. They're going to offer advice that doesn't apply. They're going to be frustrated that you can't just snap out of it. And you need to accept that their confusion is inevitable. You're in a different state of consciousness than they are. You're perceiving reality differently. And no amount of explaining will bridge that gap until they go through their own transition. So stop trying to make them understand. Stop defending your experience. Stop justifying the wrongness. You know what you're experiencing. That's enough. Let them be confused. Let them be concerned. You don't need their validation to trust your own perception. Seventh, mark time differently. Clock time and calendar time are going to feel meaningless. Days blur, weeks disappear. But you need some way to track that you're moving, that this isn't permanent, that change is happening even when it feels like you're stuck. So find a different metric. Journal one sentence a day. Take one photo a day. Notice one small thing that's different each day. Not to force progress, just to create evidence that time is passing, that you're not frozen, that the between state, as eternal as it feels, is actually temporary. And that evidence, accumulated over weeks, will show you that you're moving even when it doesn't feel like it. You don't have to be good at navigating this space. You don't have to do it perfectly. You just have to survive it. And survival sometimes looks like spending a day in bed. Sometimes looks like crying for no reason. Sometimes looks like canceling everything and sitting in silence because that's all you can handle. This isn't weakness. This is you honoring the enormity of what's happening. You're transitioning between realities. That's not a small thing. And treating it like it should be easy or quick or manageable is violence against yourself. Give yourself permission to be in process, to be a mess, to not have it together. You're between timelines, and that's enough. Here's what nobody tells you about timeline transitions. You won't know the exact moment it completes. There's no finish line, no announcement, no clear before and after. The shift happens gradually, and then suddenly you realize you're not between anymore. You've arrived. And everything that felt wrong has quietly rearranged itself into something that feels right. Not perfect, not easy, but right. Aligned. Solid in a way it hasn't been in months. The first sign is usually sleep. One night you sleep deeply. completely. And you wake up actually rested for the first time in weeks or months. Not just physically rested, energetically rested. Like something that was working overtime in your system finally powered down. The restlessness is gone. The bone-tired exhaustion has lifted. You feel like yourself again. Not the old self. Not the self you were trying to become. Just yourself. Present. Here. Real. Then you notice that time feels normal again. Days have definition. You can remember what you did yesterday. The week doesn't blur into one continuous fog. Future plans feel possible instead of abstract. You're not stuck in eternal now anymore. Linear time has returned. And with it, the ability to orient, to plan, to move forward with intention instead of just surviving moment to moment. Conversations start landing differently. You talk to someone and it feels real, connected, like you're actually meeting them instead of performing interaction. The hollowness is gone. Not with everyone. Some people are still energetically mismatched and probably always will be. But new people appear, or old people suddenly make sense again, and the conversations you have with them feed you instead of draining you. There's substance, depth, mutual recognition. You're speaking the same language again because you're operating at compatible frequencies. Decision-making becomes easy. Not because you suddenly have all the answers, but because you have clarity about what resonates and what doesn't. You look at options and you just know. No agonizing, no second-guessing, just clear knowing, yes or no, this or that. And you trust it because it's not coming from your head trying to figure things out. It's coming from alignment. From your system recognizing what matches your new frequency and what doesn't. The dreamlike quality of reality fades. Things feel solid again, present, real. You're not watching your life from a distance anymore. You're in it, fully. The dissociation that made everything feel temporary has dissolved. You're grounded, embodied, here, and reality has texture again. Weight, consequence, not in a heavy way, in a real way. You're back in your life instead of floating above it. And the synchronicities shift. They don't disappear. If anything, they become more consistent. But they change quality. During the transition, synchronicities were chaotic, overlapping information from multiple timelines creating constant weird coincidences. But now they're clean, elegant, precise. You need something and it appears. You think of someone and they reach out.